Just Like Us, for LGBT young people.
Hello, I'm Taz and I'm a director at Just Like Us. Aside from this podcast, you'll usually see our ambassadors like Elly, Arbër, Ramses and Heather delivering lessons in schools and colleges about being LGBT+. In the wake of anti-racism and pro-trans protests in the UK, I'm here to affirm that if you're LGBT+ and you feel underserved or underrepresented in LGBT+ spaces, we want Just Like Us to be yours. Already, our staff and ambassadors have worked hard this year to make sure that the work we do in schools and online better represents LGBT+ people of faith and colour from different places and social classes and with a huge range of gender identities and sexualities. When we work with young people, including the people around you who are not LGBT+, we make the world a fairer place. But if only some of our community are represented, or just some of us are treated better, that's not fair. We need everyone. If you join or work with Just Like Us as a minority within our LGBT+ community, we have staff who are there to support you and make this a more comfortable place for you. We'll consult you on the work we should be doing, and our ongoing training for ambassadors will help us be better allies to one another. That's important. We know we're not all the same and that we go through life differently to one another. Just Like Us is people-powered. We know it can be scary to get involved in something new, but we really hope you do.
You're listening to Just Like Us, the monthly show for LGBT young people.
Hello and welcome to the monthly Just Like Us podcast discussing what it's like to be LGBT+. I am Elly and I'm here with Arbër and Ramses.
Hello everyone, welcome to the podcast. We've got a special guest, Ramses. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ramses. I use he, him pronouns and I'm so happy to be here.
Yay.
Woohoo! We're happy to have you finally,
Exactly.
because it's literally been so much technical difficulties today. But finally we're here, we're recording and we're happy to be doing it. How are you guys doing this month?
Yeah, I've been okay. Obviously, we're coming out of lockdown, so I guess, things are getting a bit better socially. So that's been nice. What about you, Ramses? How have you been?
It's been very intense. I'm back to work. I'm still isolating because I'm still high risk, but I've been able to meet a few friends, even if social distancing. I've been able to meet Elly as well after
Woo!
months.
Nice.
Yes, I know. Some JLU ambassadors met in the flesh. That was great. Yeah, and we're going to talk more about that later on in the podcast.
You're listening to Just Like Us, the monthly show for LGBT young people.
What are we talking about today, Arbër?
So, given the current climate of the world right now, we really wanted to engage in a conversation that speaks about the kind of effects and the importance of protests in society and the kind of power they have in causing the change that is so needed, especially for groups that are marginalized. So we just wanted to start off the conversation by, having a conversation around what exactly does protesting mean to you? So Ramses, I'd like to ask you, what does protesting mean to you?
So we're going to start with the easy question then, I see. I sort of have a really odd relationship with protests, in a sense that, as you know, I'm not from the UK, I'm from Italy, and there are still tons of ongoing protests to fight discrimination against LGBT+ people. Because at the moment, discrimination and homophobic and transphobic crimes are still legal in Italy. So it's sort of weird to see protests happening now that are the same that happened almost 10 years ago when I started protesting there. Because it makes you wonder how effective they are to an extent. And this has sort of put everything in perspective for me because I, for example, went to the trans rights protest a few days ago. And it's been such an intense and powerful experience. And sometimes it's so hard to actually foresee the impact that these protests are going to have. And as much as, it's important for us to be there and to stand up for our rights physically, sometimes it's scary to know that, no matter what happens, that might not lead anywhere. I think the main issue with protests and with all the dialogue that's going on now about trans rights being human rights is that sometimes the burden of education falls on the shoulders of already traumatized, marginalized groups. And what really put everything in perspective for me is actually the impact that allies can have. Because at the end of the day, transgender people are a minority. And what really was great for me was to see how many allies and friends were there standing up for us. I actually went with a cisgender friend, and after I went home, she texted me and she was like, babe, this was so powerful. And it was so amazing to stand up for that. It's been so emotional. And I was actually really moved because the thing is that we can't do this alone because we are a limited number. If this comes down to, our numbers and our voices, if there isn't anyone to boost them, then they're just going to be lost. And these protests will just lead nowhere. One voice becomes hundreds, becomes thousands, and it affects people that are not directly affected by the reason why we're protesting, but they're just there because they understand the importance that protests are going to have for us and that these rights are going to have for us.
Yeah, so for a bit of background, for people that might not know, there's been a lot of protesting recently for trans rights because the government are currently debating this issue, which has been on the table for a little while, which is about transgender people's right to self-ID, which basically means define how our gender is legally recognized through ourselves. So me and Ramses both attended this protest on Saturday, and there were over 1,000 people in attendance. There was speakers discussing their experiences. People made signs. It was a very traditional kind of protest, but given lockdown restrictions, we were social distancing. Everyone was wearing masks and things like that. And it does raise the question of whether, as you were saying, sometimes protests don't always work because if a few thousand people turn out compared to the numbers that are the whole of the UK population, that's not a big number. And so what we can turn to is maybe more sort of modern forms of activism and protest through things like boycotting and online protesting, petitions, things like that, which raise a lot of support. Yeah, Arbër, do you know any good examples of that? Can you comment on that? Say anything fun?
Of course. I think for me personally, my relationship to protesting started at a very young age. My parents, who were both born and raised in the former Yugoslavia, they were very accustomed to protesting because they were being oppressed as an ethnic minority. These kind of very horrific stories. So, however, it gave me a sense of pride, and it gave me a sense of, if you want something done, we are so lucky to the fact that we can actually protest, because there are countries where protesting is illegal. So I feel like we need to recognize the privileges that we actually do have. And I also feel like we need to recognize that protesting was one of the best forms to kind of get the change that we have. And I feel like we need to really kind of respect individuals that protest in a time that was very violent. For example, the Stonewall riots in America. This was a time where individuals were being killed because of the fact, and obviously individuals are still being killed due to the fact that they're LGBT+. However, back then it was something that was at a judicial and legislative basis. And I see the fact that, trans people are going out in London and saying, we're here, we want our rights, I think it's a very beautiful thing. And I think it's an amazing step forward that we've gone to have. And just going back to your point, we live in a time of social media, and I feel like social media has been such an amazing way to kind of really get people to protest in ways that aren't, the kind of traditional protesting, whether that's, like you said, boycotting, whether that's, just posting things on your Instagram, if this kind of chain on Instagram, and the effects that we can have through social media, I think are so quite amazing. However, I did want to speak about performative activism as well, because especially with what's been happening surrounding BLM, Black Lives Matter, there's been a lot of kind of conversation around performative activism and whether individuals are posting on social media just for the sake of it and just for, to act as though they're being this activist. So what do you guys think about performative activism, and do you think it's kind of increased in societies, and how do we tackle this problem?
I think the main issue with performative allyship is the fact that it comes from the idea that being an ally is somehow a badge that you wear, and it's more an identity rather than something practical that you need to do. for me, being an ally means that you're actually taking actions to support the trans community. And being an ally means that you need to repeat those actions and to apply those beliefs every single time you have an occasion to do so. The most important thing that we can ask allies at this point is, first of all, to educate themselves, which is what Just Like Us is really trying to do, starting quite early in schools. And the other thing is to listen to what we actually want and to make sure to boost our voices rather than talk over us.
And just getting off that, I feel like this is a really abstract way to look at it, but one of the best forms of protest we can do in society is actually going against the grain, educating yourself, reading books about decolonizing your mind and reading books about different perspectives so that you can really grow as a person mentally. And sometimes I feel like social media kind of creates this space where conversation isn't allowed. And so I feel like we should be able to have a conversation, open up dialogue, and create an environment that kind of like sees education as like the main priority, which is something that Just Like Us is doing. You know, we're going into schools and we're educating young people about our experiences through, you know, individuals who obviously have those experiences. Because obviously a lot of people, you know, we need to recognize that a lot of people are simply not in the position to protest, especially during this time. I'm sad that I wasn't able to go to certain protests that happened during this lockdown. And so like, you know, we can find other ways and other methods to really get out there and educate ourselves and really kind of grow as individuals and see that as a form of protest as well.
Yeah. And beyond the education, I would say, you know, the next step is to live proudly as yourself, especially, you know, if you're LGBT+, if you're an ethnic minority, if you're any other kind of oppressed individual, if you've had a struggle, if you've had a fight, and you're still fighting that fight, is to live proudly within that, being proud of what you're fighting for.
Yeah, and that just adding to that, I think that's sort of the beauty when it comes to LGBT plus topics and identities is the fact that despite having such a long history, we don't really have a formal education about LGBT plus topics. Of course, Just Like Us is doing a lot, but it still centers our own stories because, as you mentioned, this is the most important thing. Like, our community is driven by our stories and our experiences. And if you are LGBT+, doesn't matter your background, your experience, your story is contributing to this education. Simply living your life is educating other people. And I think there is such a beauty and power in that because there is a strength in knowing that simply being yourself is inspiring others, is inspiring rights, is inspiring movements. And that you are part of that history. You know, even if you're in the closet, even if you don't have a supportive family, even if you're struggling, simply the fact that you're existing as an LGBT plus person means that you're connected to the heritage and that you're going to inspire future generations.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a good place to wrap up the conversation. So we've gone through a lot there, but it was really great to get into all of that.
You're listening to Just Like Us, the monthly show for LGBT young people.
So we're just going to start our Q&A section. And the question is, what is the Progress Pride flag and what exactly does it mean?
So the Progress Pride flag is a flag that you may have seen. It's been increasing in use in recent years. And it's basically the 6 rainbow stripes of the traditional LGBT flag. But it also has a little like chevron arrow coming in with a black stripe, a brown stripe, a blue stripe, a pink stripe, and a white stripe. The black and brown stripes represent people of colour within the LGBT plus community. And the other 3 colours, the blue, pink, and white, represent transgender people within the LGBT community. And these are kind of emphasized in this arrow because they are who the designer, who is called Daniel Quasar, which is an amazing name, by the way.
It really is.
He felt that, and I mean, it's kind of quite generally agreed that these are the people that are the most marginalized within the LGBT plus community. So how do you feel about this flag? Do you like it? Is it one that you enjoy wearing, using, seeing?
I think that it's one that very much represents me in a way because obviously given that I come from an ethnic minority background, given that I come from a Muslim background as well, it was very difficult to kind of associate with the LGBT plus community growing up as a young child, because the only kind of representation that was in the media and in society were white gay people. And it was quite difficult because obviously I didn't have that sense of representation of seeing people who had my identities and my cultural background or my religious affiliation kind of represented as a person. So it's almost like it felt like I didn't exist. And I know for many of my LGBT plus friends around me that are people of colour and come from different backgrounds, or whether they're trans or gender fluid, you know, they tell me that it's an amazing effort made by individuals in the community to actually say, you know, we recognise that you have a different struggle to us, and why we need to be a bit more vocal about the struggle in society so that they get the representation they deserve. Because we need to understand that even within the community, the LGBT plus community, there are still severe issues of racism, Islamophobia, transphobia, and we really need to kind of platform these issues. And I feel like it's an amazing effort made by individuals within the community to really platform this issue and say, this is unacceptable, and we need to make it our top agenda to make these individuals feel as though they are a part of the community, because they are. You know, we don't need to repeat ourselves, but key figures like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson that started off, you know, gay liberation in the Stonewall riots, you know, they were both women of colour, they were both trans individuals or gender fluid individuals, and they don't get the representation they deserve, and it's just unfair. So I think it's a really good thing.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that, definitely. Like, you know, we both have very different experiences, but I feel like for me, when I see this flag, it makes me feel a bit more included as someone who identifies as bisexual and non-binary, which are two kind of less represented within the LGBT community identities. So when I see this flag, well, you know, if it's in like a shop or something, or a business or a city hall or whatever, you know, where they're having a flag, or a bar, yes. Yeah, wherever they've put a flag, if I see this flag, it makes me feel like, okay, well, they're not just accepting of LGBT plus people who have a sort of already got an acceptance. For example, in general society, if you say LGBT plus, a lot of the time people will think of a gay man or a lesbian woman, and they will both be white, and that'll be the image that's in people's heads. And when the actual LGBT community appears in all its diverse glory, sometimes people it's not what they were expecting, and they're not okay with it, even if they sort of have this initial level of acceptance. So yeah, in conclusion, I do really feel represented by this flag, and I feel like it definitely highlights the important struggles that we still have going on with terms of racial equality and trans rights as well. If you have any questions for the podcast, send them in to the Just Like Us social medias at Just Like Us UK on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Shoot us any questions you have that you want us to answer, and we'll do our best to answer the questions well for you.
You're listening to Just Like Us, the monthly show for LGBT young people.
Hello, I'm Heather, and this is the JLU Choice segment of the month. So this month, I really want to recommend the half of it, which is a really, really cute rom-com on Netflix. And it's about a teenager called Elly Chu who lives in a tiny town in rural Canada. And she's lovely. She's very, very quiet. She's very clever. And she doesn't really have many friends. But she runs a business where she will write essays for other people for money. And basically one day this guy comes up to her and gives her a different proposition. And over the course of this film, it's about her falling in love with this girl at her school, but it's also about her kind of discovering friendship and looking beyond kind of what she's done all the time and thinking about whether she wants to go on to do something differently. And so I think it's really lovely because it is kind of about her sexuality, but it's a coming of age story in more ways than that. It's also about her deciding what she wants to do with her life and deciding to take the risk. And for me, I just think the reason I'm recommending it is because I just thought it was so relatable. So she's from this tiny town in Canada and I'm from a tiny town in Scotland. And just that kind of feeling that you know everyone and you're so kind of trapped and there's just no one who's quite like you. And I think that's a really common feeling for LGBT plus people to feel, is that there's nobody really like you, nobody really gets you, and you're just in this too small a place. And I guess the other thing that's really nice about it is that it centres on a lot of supportive characters. Like, her dad is so supportive of her in every way. She has a really supportive teacher who really pushes her and believes in her, and that's really nice to see, just kind of having kind of adults and friends around her who all support her and all want her to do well and live her best life, you know. So I really recommend everybody watch the half of it, especially if you're from a small town and like me have gone to a big city for university or would like to, or also maybe if none of that, if you're like, I don't relate to any of that, then well, watch it and it'll be something completely different for you as well.
You're listening to Just Like Us, the monthly show for LGBT young people.
Thank you guys for listening to us this month. We hope you have a very healthy and happy month and stay safe out there. Hopefully things will get better. And thank you for Ramses for joining us, for providing his perspective. It's been amazing having you.
Yeah, we've loved that. Yeah, thank you. We will see you all next month, and thank you very much for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Just Like Us, the monthly show for LGBT young people. The music was by Twisterium. We come into schools too. Young people, teachers and parents can find us at www.justlikeus.org.